Hello, this video is created for those preparing for the IELTS speaking test. There are two videos available, a self-test video and a video with answers provided. We wish you the best of luck with your IELTS exam preparation. What kind of public transport do you usually take? Every day I ride some form of transportation. My most preferred form of public transportation are the city buses. They can pretty much get you to your destination, and there is no need to have to go underground and ride on the subway. I prefer riding on the bus because I can see things from the bus window, and usually there is always a seat available on the bus. When do you usually take public transport? In your everyday life or when you are traveling? Every day I use public transportation. Since it is more eco-friendly and, in my opinion, more convenient than driving, I use public transportation when I need to go somewhere. Usually on weekdays and weekends, I travel or go somewhere such as to work or a neighboring city. So I often use public transportation. For example, a bus, subway, or taxi. Do most people prefer public transport in your country? Yes and no. In my country, it is more convenient to own and drive a car than rely on public transportation. However, it majorly depends on the area or city one lives in. This is because in the US, most areas are viewed as remote outside of cities. So public transportation is limited or non-existent. Even in my hometown, public transportation, though available, is quite limited, and trying to use it can be time-consuming. It would take twice as long to go somewhere than simply driving oneself. Did you take public transport when you were a kid? Yes. When I was younger, my mother didn't have a car. So when she would pick me and my sister up from school, she would take a taxi or a bus. Then together we would ride the bus or take a taxi back home. Additionally, sometimes my family would go into New York City for trips to the museum or to visit family. When we traveled into New York City, we would ride on the LIRR instead of driving to avoid traffic jams. Will there be more people taking public transport in the future? I believe so. Already, there are many companies that provide some form of public transportation for people. For example, nowadays, people do not just have bus, taxi, or subway transportation options. Many cities are creating bike or other lanes for people who like to bicycle or ride mopeds. Additionally, some cities in certain countries have started releasing community bikes, mopeds, electric scooters, etc. for residents to use as a form of transportation. Using public transportation is not only convenient, but good for the environment. So I think more people will ride or take public transportation in the future. A few years ago, at the start of COVID, there was a lot of worry and concern for one's safety. I remember feeling concerned about both family and friends as we were all far apart. However, in light of negative news daily surrounding COVID, I received wonderful news that a friend of mine met someone and got married. It was great news as my friend no longer had any close family and had been living on her own for a long time. When I received a message and photo of her wedding, which was a small outdoor celebration, I cried. As COVID cases were rising globally, traveling overseas and quarantine restricted me from being able to see my friend or attend her wedding. But after COVID, when my friend and her husband came to Korea, we had a reunion. I felt so happy to see how my friend was doing and to meet her new family. Where do people get news? People can obtain news from multiple sources: the internet, TV, newspaper, and by word of mouth. Majorly, when looking for some specific type of news, people search for news on the internet. The internet is both fast and convenient and is accessible on smartphone devices. TV is also a popular way to get news. Not only can one listen to news announcements, they can also see photos as well as commentary on the news by people with some form of connection to the news being reported. What kind of news do people like to read? World news, local news, fashion news, celebrity news, economic and political news, cultural news, etc. People like to read a variety of news. As everyone has a different preference, there are many different news outlets that cater to people's interest by sharing a variety of general news within one of the categories: world, local, fashion, celebrity, economic and political, cultural, etc. How can companies tell the public its news? On the internet or through press conference. Companies can release news via their own channel or website portal. However, usually companies, especially big companies, often release news through press conferences if the news is a matter of importance for the general public. For example, companies like Apple and Samsung typically release news at company-sponsored events. During these events, these companies also host press conferences on the company growth, focus, and new electronic items being released or upgraded. Once news is released, other news outlets, including online news outlets, will report on the news first released by the companies. What do you think of the news on social media? It is not always accurate. Lately, I have been seeing news pop up on my social media feed. Sometimes the news is eye-catching, and I click on the article link to find more details. However, I always question the credibility of the news. The reason is social media platforms can have real, fake, and incorrect news posted. The internet has a wide array of websites that provide news for people. However, whether or not the news is true, one must check. So if I do see news on my social media feed, I make sure to check the news on more credible news outlets, news websites, newspapers, etc.